And now it's recording. Welcome everybody to today's Esports Research Colloquium. My name is Oliver Leis and I have the pleasure of hosting this session on physical activity and the case of Danish grassroots esports. It's also my privilege to welcome two esteemed speakers, Robert Jønsson and Asbjørn Jensen, for today's session. And they will be briefly introducing themselves before transitioning into the topic on the intersection of esports and physical activity, shedding light on, as has been already addressed, the Danish grassroots esports scene. So without wasting any time, it's my pleasure to hand over to Robert and Asbjørn. And I would like to ask you, Asbjørn, to say a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Oliver. My name is Asbjørn Jensen. I am a project manager at the Center for Youth Studies, which is not under a university, but it's actually an NGO. And we do perform sort of action research or make projects based on science, but then we also tend to try to make a difference in the actual world. So usually we don't have that's at least what my boss says. We don't have time to get articles peer reviewed and things like that. We all are always chasing the next project because that's where the funding usually are. So that's how we work. I started there for since I think it's 3 years ago. Yeah, on this particular project because I have a story in actually grassroots esports in Denmark. I've been a board member of Copenhagen Esports for 5 years, where we have been doing a lot of different activities, but we mostly are experts in fighting games activities, and then of course a whole youth department where we do sort of team games. That's at least what we call it. So we do trainings in Counter-Strike especially. So that's sort of my background story in regards of this project. Yeah.
Yes. My name's Robert, and I have been working on this project with Asbjørn for a year now, helping with consulting the different grassroots associations and get physical activity into the training. Before that, I finished up my master's in sports science, where I finished my master thesis about esports and physical activity. So I kind of have some insight into a lot of the literature in esports and physical activity. And esports is just fun. And I've also been coaching in Fortnite and FIFA, and so I have some coaching experience as well. I think Asbjørn is ready to take off the presentation.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, Oliver, I'll just get started.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for having us here at the Esports Colloquium. I think we've been looking forward to this for quite some time. It's very interesting to present this idea, or maybe the project, to an audience that of course knows a lot about esports, but also maybe because the project is a bit different from what you may know around the esports scene and the theme of physical activity, where I think, at least to my knowledge, it's been mainly focused on sort of the elite or the professional scene with esports athletes, and how physical activity actually are beneficial to what they try to perform on the server in order to win more prizes and things like that. But here we have we have experienced that the perspective from this project is or should be or could be quite different actually, and that's more or less I think what we're gonna talk about today in the specific case of Danish grassroots esports. So let me get started. Maybe I should say it's been a while since I've done a presentation in English, so please bear with me. I've tried to make a manuscript so I don't stumble too much about with the words. So that's just a small disclaimer. So but when you partake in discussions about what defines Danish esports, as you all know, it's a big thing here, and the talks are usually starting with describing this picture of Astralis winning a championship. And here on the picture, it's a specific picture where they are actually winning a blast tournament, which is also a Danish company, and they actually used to be owned by the same company, but they had to differ because of course there was a conflict in interest there. But there's also a different story to the Danish esports scene for the past and ongoing for the past 5 years or so. And the traditional sports organizations turned their attention to esports and gaming when they finally realized how much of an impact gaming had on today's youth culture. In Denmark, 92% of all children in the age between, I think it's 1 and 15, play video games, and 50% of them play video games on a daily basis. So, of course, it's a huge deal here, as it probably are for the rest of the Western world, of course. For the national sports organizations, the idea was to implement esports in the traditional sports club manners and support the grassroots organizations that wanted to use esports in a setting that you would normally recognize from I don't know, a typical football training or something like that. And so on for the next 3 or 4 years. Or from the past 5 years, grassroots esports in Denmark have been changing dramatically, and I think we reached, I think that was before Corona, we reached 9,000 members in organizations that offered esports training on a weekly basis, where you meet up along with your team and you play together for a couple of hours, just like you see on the picture here. This, of course, has presented itself as a shift in the institutionalization of esports in Denmark, where you now both have the elite esport brands such as Astralis, but also around 150 organizations. At some point, we even had 200 that work on a lower level with broader, community-oriented values and ideas, such as educating kids in unity and coherence and promoting a balanced approach to gaming culture and esports instead of only results and prize money and things like that. And at the same time, we've been finding ourselves within this national discourse. I think you all are very familiar with this discourse where gaming and screen time have been partly accused as being the culprit in the decline in the mental well-being of youth in today, and of course also very much the decreasing physical activity levels that face our youth and adolescents today. So we still meet this classic idea of this stereotypical gamer that we see here as Cartman from the South Park episode, Make Love Not Warcraft. I think most of you are probably familiar with that. But then an idea of changing this picture to perhaps this guy Benjamin Bremer from Astralis, who you can see, of course, is pretty physical. He's in good condition, let's say it like that. And of course, he's a professional athlete at Astralis. So this is sort of the background for the project, and that's why we at the Center for Youth Studies got a funding or a grant together with the Sports Confederation of Denmark. That's the Olympic organization, to research more on this topic in order to develop meaningful physical activities and increase the levels of physical activity within the framework of a typical esports training in grassroots organizations. And that's because the grassroots organizations are through their membership with the they are members of the Confederation of Sports because they have esports at a football club, for that matter, or something else. So that's how the Confederation of Denmark are actually trying to do a service to the grassroots, or that was the idea at least. But we'll get to that later on. So just a bit on the method of the project in order to get a short overview of what we did. It's been a project over 3 years, so it's quite a history here. But the project started with this first phase, which is the research phase, and it was we visited and observed around 6 grassroots esports trainings that focused on physical activity in order to learn from their methods and getting to know the culture of grassroots esports, of course. And then besides from overlooking their training, we also conducted focus group interviews with the players, as well as their coaches and leaders. And then we also made quite a large survey that we distributed through the registered grassroots esports clubs in Denmark through the sports organization. We held the survey open for almost 2 years because in the meantime we also were hit by the COVID pandemic, of course. So that's a small thing we have to take into account when we're looking over the entire project here. The second phase consisted of a developing phase where we developed prototypes of a model and implemented them in esports clubs in order to sort of adjust the models and activities. And the prototypes were based on the findings from the research phase. And I think Robert will later present the findings from the research phase and tell more about the models in particular. In addition to this, we spoke to more coaches and leaders to hear from them what they identified as what should be the best practice, and we talked to them about the whole idea about integrating physical activity in esports training. And then we had this phase of testing and adjusting, and the original idea here was to have a development phase, do some pilot studies, then adjust, and then implement it in 11 esports clubs. Actually, the goal was 15, but COVID. But because it was so difficult for the esports clubs to sort of put down a certain date where we where we started all the sort of processes in the clubs, we had to adjust and make them start whenever they had the time for it. So it was more of a circular dynamic where we continually recruited and started these it was 8-week programs with physical activity, and then we all the time just changed the models along the way. And for the last phase, of course, was about documentation, evaluation, and writing a project report. And we presented these the findings at a webinar or an online conference along with the Sports Confederation of Denmark. I think that was 3 weeks ago. Sorry. And unfortunately, the report is for the time not being translated into English. I'm afraid Robert and I will have to do that in our spare time since we're out of funding for the project. But I think me and Robert both are very engaged in this whole thing. So, but we'll have to have discussions about that if that's gonna be a thing in order to present the findings to more of the English audience, so to say. And of course, I had to mark this. It was roughly at these points around the project where we had the COVID pandemic. Doing whatever it does, we had lockdowns in the esports clubs, and especially esport was an activity that was actually quite surprisingly hard to sort of transition into a home environment, because that was the whole idea from the esports clubs to begin with, that you actually had to dissolve or sort of take the home activity and put it into an esports club sort of physical environment. So the COVID experience were actually quite actually destructive to the esports scene, which is why I think today, just in comparison, we have around 6,000 members of esports clubs now. So we lost around 3,000 members in a couple of years because of COVID. And that's the the project so far. So I think Robert will now present to you some of the findings that we had from the research phase, and with a more concrete rundown of all the physical activities and our experiences from that.
Yes, I'm just gonna share my screen. Do you see it now?
Yes. Thanks.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the findings and the kind of practical experience that I have made while being out in these esports associations. I've been helping Asbjørn in writing this project and also analyzing a lot of the interviews and the workshops that we have held with coaches and players and leaders. So the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to try to take you through some of the most relevant data because we have a lot of data about this and the long report on 77 pages. So it's kind of hard to pin it down to 20 minutes, but I'm going to try. I'm going to talk about what was being used in esports before, what the coaches did as a best practice of physical activity in esports. And I'm going to talk a bit about what motivates the players to participate in grassroot esports. And then I'll give insight to the activities we have designed and end off with my experience while being out as a consultant. We start off with the best practice, how the physical activity was being used before this project. Many of the coaches in interviews and workshop kind of expressed that they used physical activity as short breaks, these kind of brain breaks, kind of 5 to 10 minutes away from the screen, either as a warm-up before the training session or as activities in the training session. And this is also supported by scientific research that these short breaks can improve learning and improve cognitive abilities of school children, such as concentration and memory as well, which is also key in esport. And furthermore, this concentration, with a Danish study that I also helped conduct, we found that after such a short break, the players and coaches found that the players had renewed focus and concentration when they got back to the screen. Another way of kind of using physical activity was by engaging the players in the physical activity. So by kind of taking a gaming interest and the motivation in gaming and put it into the physical activity. We had an interview with a coach who made an activity based on the game Among Us, where the players kind of helped develop some of the rules, so they kind of got an ownership over the activity and feeling that they were part of this activity. And they could also see a clear connection between the game they played and the physical activity. In Danish esports, this project by Bruce, she found that the gaming interests of these players are they're very interested in gaming and technology. And often these players in grassroots associations in Denmark, they neglect physical activity and health because they have either bad experience with it or they don't really care simply. So by taking this interest they have in gaming into the physical activity and kind of make them forget about the health part of it and motivate them through the gaming interest. The last thing we found was that the coaches used the relevant learning goals when they set up the physical activities to help kind of let the players see that the physical activity had a purpose in relation to esports. So when coaches set up the activities, they mentioned how the activity could help them in cooperating or communicating better and solve problems which they could use in their esports game. And these are all key skills in esports, and I think we all know it if we've played, and we don't really need a scientific paper to say that. These are key skills in esports. So these practice findings we kind of used as inspiration when we designed our physical activities. Kind of wanted to hold the thing that works and take it into our activities as well. But we also wanted to learn more about what motivated the players when we designed our activities to kind of, withhold the motivation of the players in the activities. The most obvious one was that it's a fun leisure time to play esports, and that is also why that they participate in grassroots esports in their spare time. It's obviously because they find it interesting and fun to play esports. And in the questionnaire, 62% of the players use most of their free time on gaming. Also, when they're in these grassroots associations, they get a sense of fellowship and social connections. And many of the players, actually 44% of the players, choose to participate in grassroots esports to play with friends or be with other gamers. So these grassroots esports are kind of creating a place where they come out of the room and meet someone with same interest as themselves, and they sit together and play together, and can talk about the things happening on the screen. So it's kind of this creation of fellowship in grassroots esports that motivates the players to participate. Also, many of the players are there, half of the players are there to develop in-game abilities, to become better at the games they're participating in. Could be Counter-Strike or Fortnite, but they want to be better. So what we experienced was that there was kind of two different age groups. We had the younger players who mostly were there for the fellowship and the social connections. However, the older players above 12, 13 years old, they were mostly there to kind of get better at the game and develop their in-game abilities. Of course, the fellowship, it meant something to them, but it was definitely the in-game abilities they wanted to focus on, whereas the younger players were just there to kind of play anything really and just be with their friends. So we took all these motivations into account when we designed our physical activity. We wanted to make physical activity an integrated part of esport and not try to force physical activity into esports, which is why I've also highlighted that we want to respect esports and the players and their interest in esports. So it's not about forcing health and fitness into esports. It's more about creating a way physical activity can be integrated in a good way into esports that makes sense in esports. So we designed some various activities, different types of activities. We have the deathmatch activities, where we kind of used the screens as an integration in the physical activity. We set up a server on Fortnite, for example, where the players all play together, either as teams or against each other, free for all. And every time someone died or got a kill, it triggered an activity. It could be throwing a beanbag into a bin, or it could be getting up from the chair, high-fiving someone on the other side before you could get back to the screen and get on with the killing. So this was one of the ways we tried to integrate the gaming into our physical activity. Furthermore, we created this Fortnite Live, which was, I think, one of the most used activities away from the screen, where we have an obvious integration of the gaming elements in the physical activity. You might see an arena of cones and paper balls on the ground, but when we set up this game, we make sure to call these elements. The arena is not called area; it's called Tilted Towers, which is an area in Fortnite. And the paper balls are not paper balls; they are sniper bullets. So to kind of play into these elements and really highlight that this is not just paper balls. We have to play along because this is young children, and to kind of engage them into this playful activity we're setting up. So in this activity, we have also a lot of cooperation and communication, because we pair them in groups of two. One of them is blindfolded. He has to jump into tilted towers, and the other guy on the sideline is the kind of controller who controls the character in the on the arena. And it becomes very clear when we are setting up this game that many of these players don't know how to communicate well, and often they're screaming, "He's there, he's right there," and they don't really realize that the guy they're on team with can't see. And as a coach, that is very helpful, such an activity as this, because you can really help the players realize, okay, I have to be more specific when I'm communicating with my teammates, both in this activity and also in game, because my teammate can't see my screen when we're playing. So yeah, this activity is very helpful to kind of get these learning goals highlighted. Then we had the short brain break activities as well. We were short, very short, and very easy to set up for some of the coaches who lack experience with physical activities. They kind of tend to go towards these activities because they're easy to set up. We have an activity, as we see here, where this activity is called Sniper Flick, where we have a mouse pad that we fold up, and they use it as a sniper scope, and then they have to snipe the other players around in the room. Every time they spot a player, they say the name, and the player is dead. Then we also have kind of name games of this type, this brain break type of activities, where new players can kind of learn names of the other players in the association. We often have this one where we have one in the middle, and then a circle around where they have their hands towards the guy in the middle, and then the guy in the middle has to fast reach out and hit the hands of the people outside the circle and say the names of the people outside the circle. So to kind of learn names and also train a bit of reaction time. Yes, so I'm going to get a bit into my experience while being out in the, what is it called? Yeah, associations and helping the coaches and such. I want to kind of start off with a story of one of the associations I've been in, and to kind of give an idea of what physical activity can do in esports. We have this association. There's a new player arriving with his mom, and he's being sat in the room with the PCs. The mom is asking the coach what they're going to do and if it'd be okay. He's there. It's all good. The mom leaves, and the player is just sitting there for 45 minutes, 1 hour, playing alone, not talking to anyone. Then after this hour is gone, we go out, we do this Fortnite Live activity, and I pair him with one of the more integrated players on the association. And now they're kind of forced to learn each other's names and talk together and communicate to kind of achieve success in this activity. And at first they were both very shy because they didn't know each other. But as soon as the paper towels, the sniper bullets start to flow in the game, they forget everything and they just start to laugh and scream at each other and have fun together. So after this activity is over, we get back to the screens. Now these two players are sitting together next to each other, and they're playing together for the rest of the hour of the training session. And when it all ended, the little new player, he was not very old, he kind of hugged the other guy and said that he couldn't wait to get back and play with him next time. And that is one of the success stories, I think. And I might be biased, but I think the physical activity really helped in building that social connection. And I think that's one of the reasons we kind of want the physical activity in esports, because they kind of meet each other in another arena and not just sitting in front of a screen, staring in their own screen, kind of forced to get out and see each other in the eyes and talk together, which is important in nowadays where everyone is sitting behind a screen all the time, pretty much. So the players, they want to participate in physical activity. Especially the young players want to participate, and these gaming elements are very obvious motivators for the players. They really get into it with their soul, and they also mention that the paper towels are not bullets, they're snipers. And when they get a kill, you just got sniped and 360 no scope and things like that are often said during a Fortnite live. But there's a negative side to it as well. These activities can take a bit of focus away from esports, especially the younger players can be hard to get back to the screen because they're so keen on doing these activities. So you have to be aware as a coach how to kind of implement it in the right way so it doesn't take too much of the esports time. I've seen coaches who just let young players run around for 2 hours outside the room, not playing esports at all for 2 hours. So kind of just being, babysitters for 2 hours. And that is something I've experienced with the coaches in these grassroots associations in Denmark. They're very much lacking experience. They're either gamers themselves who doesn't have experience with grassroots associations at all, or they are parents who have no idea about what games they're playing. So they're kind of just there in a way to help the players log in and kind of help with technical issues and just let the players do their own thing on the screens. However, when I've been out consulting, these activities I've brought with me kind of inspired them to think in more structure to the training, to kind of force them to think about what are we doing before the activity, and what activity are we going to do, and what we will do after this activity. So kind of give them more structure to their training. However, there's still coaches who lack experience. So yeah, it's very hard to. Coaches lack experience. I think Asbjørn will get more into that in the conclusion. And I think also one of the things we found is that we need to educate coaches more about this. They need to have more experience with esport overall, I think. So the physical activity kind of helped giving structure to that training session in a way. So the last thing I experienced is also a very big key of these grassroots esports, because the parents decide if the players are going to be there and they're there to drop them off. And I have experienced there's a big knowledge gap between the child and the parents, because the parents don't really know what the child is doing on the screen. They don't really know what they're playing, and there's many parents who don't really realize that the whole social life of their child is kind of on the screens. They have their friends on Discord and Fortnite and on Snapchat, and that's also why one of the most common causes for arguments in Denmark at home is about screen time, because parents don't really know that there's a whole social life to their children online on the screens. And the parents also lack a lot of information about esports. They don't know what the child is doing for 2 hours at esports. They have no idea what they're doing and how they're training and what's going to happen. So they kind of need more information about what's happening at an esports training. However, when we talk to them, coaches tell them that there's a physical active aspect of the training as well. You can kind of see the shoulders drop, and it's kind of a relief to the parents to hear that, okay, my child is not just going to sit in front of a screen for 2 hours. He's actually also going to see someone face to face and be a bit active with somebody else. And they become sort of more acceptable towards letting their child participate in esports when they hear about the physical active part. So to kind of summarize what we found out what motivated the grassroots esports players. They want to have fun. They want to have this sense of fellowship in the association, and they want to become better at the gaming skills. And physical activity can help in all of these things. It can be fun. It can create a sense of fellowship where you meet each other face to face, and it can teach you relevant learning goals such as communication and cooperation. We also found out how physical activity should be used and how it was used and how it makes sense in esports. And we kind of found out that it makes sense to have this clear link to gaming interest and elements to motivate the players. And then we found out that physical activity in esports, it's not about the health or the fitness at all. It's about structure, social well-being, and kind of renewing these cognitive abilities such as concentration and memory and learning, and kind of give the training session more quality when you have physical activity in the training. And to end it off, we realized that we really have to respect esports and the player motivations to not discourage these young players from participating in the physical activity. Because if we kind of start to do push-up and running, they might not have great experience with such things because maybe they don't have the ability to do such things or the body to kind of participate in it, and it can discourage many of these players to participate. So kind of disguise the physical active part in the gaming elements in a way. And I think that was it for me, and I'll give the word back to Asbjørn now to finish
Thanks,
off.
Robert.
Yes.
Let me see if I can get back to my presentation. Do you all see this table?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So just in addition to what Robert just presented, and thank you for that, Robert, very insightful. We also mapped more, let's say, structural levels of barriers and potential in the case of physical activities. And I will briefly go through each of these small squares along the way here. So when it comes to the esports clubs as a physical place and an organization, then we have a couple of barriers. I could probably put a lot more dots here because there has been, as we experienced, it's been difficult to get the clubs to actually acknowledge or buy into the idea that physical activity in esports were actually a thing that was necessary or a thing that could be beneficial. I told before that there were around 150 clubs in Denmark, and I think we've been working together with tops maybe 20 organizations. So there's been a lot of them that were not interested in the other way or another. And that's most likely because it's not a priority to the esports clubs. They have a lot of things that they need to take care of in order to withstand the core activity of the esports training. First of all, that's the top picture, right? You need a board, you need statutes, which also means there's a lot of bureaucracy in the Danish grassroots organizational system, and that is quite a hassle when most of these board members, or almost entirely all of them, are only volunteers. So they don't have all the time in the world to do the organizational requirements of having an esports activity. Of course, there's also the technical side of things. You don't just set up 2 football goals on a field and then you have a football training. No, you need funding for computers, and it's not just ordinary computers. They need to be top tier, high end, in order to attract the members who wants to play on the best systems, of course. So that's, and not just you need the hardware, but you also need the software, and you need the competencies and the abilities to make sure that these computers are functional all the time. Because I'm not sure if you have kids, but that's my experience from Copenhagen Esports, that kids, they're harsh on software. They install things, they do weird stuff on the screen. They change the system requirements, like a lot of different things that makes it very hard to sort of make the computer good at all times. And of course, very important to the core activity, you need a coach. If you don't have a coach, you don't have a training. So that's one of the highest priorities. And then, of course, you have the players. What are their interests? What games are they willing to play? And how does that mesh with the coach's ideas or dreams of what he wants to coach? Let's say Fortnite has been very popular for the past couple of years, but many of the people who are willing to coach esports today are older Counter-Strike players around the same age as me and Robert, so they have no interest in coaching Fortnite. So usually Fortnite is parents or very, very heartful adults that are actually willing to learn Fortnite in order to structure a training for the kids. But who knows? Last year we saw Valorant exploding, and we don't know what the next big game might be. So there's the whole system, and I'll get to that later. The whole structure about esports, especially when it comes to all the commercial parts, it becomes very difficult and becomes a barrier to implementing physical activity, because there's these changes all the time. So let's say Robert had this Fortnite live game. If Fortnite is not the most popular game anymore, then you have to change. Then it's something else. You need to as a coach, be able to change the idea or change the rules or change the game in itself. And then there's the whole idea about the practice what you preach thing, and that's just to our experience, and it becomes a bit normative now. And of course I'm biased here as the project manager, but when you have like what you hope to promote in an esports club are not necessarily what that are actually being implemented in the esports club. It's the esport leaders and the clubs are very good at actually being present on social media and telling, because they know the parents are interested in physical activity, that they're very good at telling that they do physical activity, but showing it might be a bit different because of the experiences, as Robert pointed towards earlier, that the experience and the competencies of the coaches are not necessarily on playing games and doing physical activities. So I have a small video where you can see some of the games that a small club did earlier, and this is actually one of our exercises. So I'm not gonna well, maybe we should critique our own exercises, but maybe it's also just a fact that as Robert stated earlier, we cannot do physical activity that actually promotes cardiovascular training and functionality, because when you have a training session of 2 hours, then if you need to get benefits from physical activity, you need to do hard physical work for maybe 30 minutes, and that's not that doesn't fit very well with the framework of an esports training. So that's why we do exercises like these. Let's see it. Can you hear the sound?
No.
Maybe it's fine. There's some electronic music playing along, but this is actually one of the activities. Yeah, so it's as you can see, it's more in a sort of in the level of playing than it is on physical activity. So structurally, when you look at it above, sort of from the esports clubs, we find this discourse that I pointed towards earlier around gaming as sedentary, and therefore it's problematic, and it presents itself as a pointing finger at the esports clubs, who, I don't know why, but apparently they are supposed to be responsibility for the members' physical activity. We asked the parents about that, by the way, and they said that it's of course not only up to the club itself. But the point here is around the discourse that the esports find that the goal of the esports training are not necessarily physical activity. So they sort of want to challenge that whole idea. that the grown-ups see the esports scene as a symbol of screen inactivity and a sedentary activity. So they want to challenge the whole idea of what the goal is for an esports training. And so in that regard, the physical activity becomes sort of the battle arena of the esports sort of playing field. So and also I think Robert stated this earlier as well, that the clubs actually regard exercise as a counterproductive activity, because it challenges this whole idea of what an esports training is about, where you don't, like at esports, you don't do physical activity, you practice video gaming, or you want to become better at that, not the physical activity. So it's a discourse that sort of becomes very challenging towards one another. But there's also let me see, here it is. When it comes to the organizational situation of esports in Denmark, we have this historical background of this self-organizing and all the commercial interests that has been the core power in promoting esports in Denmark. And the focus on a more balanced approach to esports with physical activity only beginning to increase as the fear of screen activities are on a high level, and also of course because Astralis and other elite teams are actually beginning to use physical activity as a way of improving their performances. But as you can see here on the small graph, the colorful one to the left is the accumulated prize winnings from esports in Denmark. They're actually, apparently, this report came out I think a month ago. It's actually one of the highest in the world. So from a structural or maybe a political point of view, why would you actually change anything? The esports scene are doing fine, but this lack of political interference or strategic impact means that things might continue as they have with an absence of physical activity in esports, grassroots esports. And I'm not sure if that's a problem. The problem of physical inactivity are probably a lot bigger than what an esports club can actually manage. But if you want to promote physical activity in grassroots esports, I think it should become an integrated part of a stronger organizational cooperation between the political organizations, the sports organizations, and perhaps even the government or something like that. So that was some of the barriers. I'm sure we can discuss more of them when we come to the Q&A. But when it comes to the potentials of physical activity in the esports clubs, we see for one thing that we have found that it's a great importance to the parents, and we've stated that already. It's important to them that there's a focus on physical activity, and I think that actually in all this might help fight the whole stereotype of esports being seen as something unhealthy, especially when the clubs are actually implementing physical activity. So that actually leads to a larger amount of parents acknowledging gaming and esports and actually letting their children join the esports clubs in order to get more members and making sure that they actually are playing in an esports club instead of playing just at home. You can do both, of course, and there's nothing wrong with playing from home. But as Robert pointed out earlier, I think there's a lot of benefits by playing when you're physically together with your teammates. So, like, in addition to this, I mean that the esports clubs actually have a stronger, let's call it raison d'être, like a stronger existential grounding if you have physical activities in your esports training, because it becomes very different from the activity that you do at home. So there's actually a better reasoning for going to the training than to stay at home, which makes, like, it qualifies the idea of an esports club even further. And as I stated before, the quality of esports training, to my view at least, increases with the physical activities, because they get to know each other better. it helps them create friendships, and it becomes a stronger affiliation than just the online community. Oh yeah, and of course that was just a small propagandic picture. And yeah, I should have shown you these pictures earlier, but of course, as I stated before, you see the gamer maybe playing at home, and then the gamers playing together at an esports facility, and there's another level of energy there, I'd say. So at the structural level of the potentials, I think physical activity could be a part of promoting a larger societal support and lead to a stronger grassroots esports scene in Denmark. At the same time, the promotion of physical activities might be able to change the idea of screen time as this culprit, by showing that you can easily both be healthy and play video games at the same time. And I think all of us are well aware of the many positive outcomes of playing video games, but the idea is also to state or make sure that you don't actually need to necessarily be inactive just because you play video games. You can actually live a quite healthy life by both playing video games and also, of course, living a balanced life in between, of course. Furthermore, of course, physical activity might promote the whole cultural transition where exercise increasingly will be accepted by the coaches as a part of an esports training, not because of the fear of unhealthy children and the whole stereotypical thing, but because the quality of the esports training will actually increase. And I cannot emphasize this enough that the coaches are sort of they're a very important actor here in this whole element, because they need to promote the physical activities. I think if we had to do the project all over again, instead of interviewing a lot of kids and hoping to figure out what their motivation for physical activity was, we had to talk a lot more about the coaches and how they actually, what their whole idea of this physical activity and stereotypical ideas and what that role actually played for them. I think that's very important. So in order to, I sort of took the discursive figure here from before, and then I tried to put over here what are the potentials or the goals in order to promote physical activity in esports even further. And the idea is here that we see this shift that I talked about earlier, a cultural shift where like we have met all these coaches that are against physical activity. If we can change them to see that they should be implemented, that physical activity should be implemented not because of the stereotype but because of the benefits, then I'd say we've have come quite far. And then it instead of becoming a deadlock, it becomes a spiral that increases the idea of physical activity. So in conclusion, we then hope to change the discourse, of course, within esports, and then the stereotype. So it's a very ambitious project all of a sudden. But all in all, in conclusion, I think we came to see that the idea of promoting physical activities in esports training had less to do with making sure that children are healthy while gaming, and more to do with the social benefits and well-being of the players. So the amount of levels of physical activity you're able to invest in the span of an esports training are so low that the physical benefits are very limited, of course. I stated that earlier as well. It does help with concentration and focus with the small active breaks, but it doesn't make you Benjamin Bremer. And that is, I think, precisely not the goal, because his reality is a bit different from the guys that we see here down in the corner. So the goal here is more to create a structure where you, besides from training esports, also train your social competencies by doing activities where you get to know your teammates in a different arena than the online world. And that supports the stronger bond and coherence within the team atmosphere. And that's the idea, that should be starting a positive spiral that makes children stay at the esports clubs for longer and keeps the hobby well balanced, and by also promoting that you can have gaming and physical activity going hand in hand and not necessarily being against one another, so to speak. So I'm not, Robert, I'm not sure if you said I would say something, state something in the conclusion. I'm not sure if I got to that point, but maybe I think there's time now for the Q&A. So if everybody, if you have questions, I think there's time for this now.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Asbjørn and Robert, for your insightful presentation. I very much enjoyed your overview of the project in general, the games that you developed, the perceived effects on the players and children, especially in grassroots Danish esports, and also the learnings that you take from the project. And honestly, I have a lot of questions, and I don't know where to start exactly. But one question that might be a bit tactical before we can also address questions from the audience is maybe to talk, we can see what you're doing, to talk a little bit more about the future directions. You slightly touched on that, Asbjørn, but maybe you can also make or create links to other aspects such as engaging stakeholders, such as maybe collaboration with schools or local organizations or governments. So what do you think is the future of grassroots esports? Maybe not only in Denmark, but also globally. Where do you see the future of grassroots esports leading to?
Thank you, Oliver. Should I try to answer that, Robert? You can just, feel free to add anything. Because of course it's a big question, and I think because of the success of esports in Denmark, there has been an increasing focus and interest from the political side of things and the sports organizations. But on the other side, we also have this the Esports Association, Esport Denmark, which are they are in a special place. I think it's hard for them to get funding, and they have a hard time finding or figuring out how they actually can service the grassroots esports clubs, who are the ones that are supposed to be the members, of course. But I know for sure that there are talks within Esport Denmark and the Olympic organization and the other sports association. It's called DGI. They have been very active on the esports scene for the past 5 years. We owe a lot of the success for esports grassroots to them. They have consultancies, and they've been around in Denmark for quite some time, helping promote the grassroots esports. And I think they're trying to cooperate, but it's always a question of who's going to pay the bills and what are the main projects here. And then you probably have the government who are thinking in different ways. For instance, they just established a center for gaming development, and that's also a part of gaming culture, right? And so that's where the political side of things are trying to promote gaming. So there's a lot of organizational and politics that becomes difficult, but I know that the Olympic organization that we have been working with are they have been vocal in they got a big grant from a fund last year, and the continuing project of esports and physical activity are written into that project idea. So I think we're going to see more of this in the future, and they since we developed this along with them, they're gonna transition this project more or less into that new grant.
Yeah, thank you. Is there something you would like to add, Robert?
Yeah, because we did this project during COVID as well, and as Asbjørn mentioned, that we saw a drop of 3,000 members afterwards, and I think also maybe gaming is after COVID it became more at home thing because everyone got their own gear now. So I think it could go both ways. I don't really know if we don't do something about the coaches and the organization of grassroots esports, I don't think it will grow in Denmark. I think we need more experience and more make it more talent oriented, maybe, to gain more players, members, I think. And also, I don't really know what's happening in other countries, because in Denmark we kind of have a grassroots system of these spare time activities, and I don't really know how it works in other countries in Europe. I know Sweden just acknowledged esports as a sport as well, so they could maybe kind of go in the way of grassroots esports now. But as a whole in the world, I don't really know how it will go with grassroots esports.
Yeah,
I would say, sorry, Oliver, like the idea of physical activity, I think it's relevant in most of the ideas of playing video games physically with your friends at an organization. I think that would typically be a couple of hours of training, maybe. And if you train for longer periods of time, it becomes more relevant that you have these active breaks and things like that. So I think it's the difficult part is absolutely on the structural levels, and it could be idea of maybe promoting this whole idea of two coaches, maybe having online courses or just courses in order to educate the coaches even more on this agenda, even though it's quite problematic. If you're a coach that thinks physical activity are not a good idea, why would you take that course? You wouldn't. So there's also a big cultural thing here.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree, and I think it might be beneficial to get back to the interview data that you conducted from the children or younger adults and see what they said or reported motivates them to join esport clubs and put more emphasis on this, or conduct further research to see how to actually attract and get players engaged, and maybe also work with parents and how to attract them and convince them that esports is not only about screen time, but as you said, also about incorporating physical activity and benefiting or supporting social networks. And one thing I want to say in that regard before we come to the questions from the audience, so thank you for raising your hands, just a moment, is that you shared a beautiful story. I think, Robert, you mentioned that, a beautiful story where one player was so engaged in the activity itself, and then he hugged the other player. And even after the game, this connection continued. And then on the other hand, you said that some coaches, lack time on screen time because players very much engage and benefit from the physical activity. But then we might want to ask what benefits players the most, so we can reflect on that. But this discussion for another day, I think. But what we can think about is how do we promote players in continuing physical activity beside esports? So of course we want them to train and make the best out of our time, but also include this with warm-up sessions and maybe physical activity breaks. But how can we create networks outside of our environment? So maybe it's good to create a Discord server for the kids and stuff like that. Have you made any experience with those strategies, like providing them with additional tools that they can use to network and chat about, meeting to play soccer or Fortnite games that you created?
No.
Okay. No problem. So was just something that I that still resonates with me, and I want to invest more time thinking about. Okay, then I think one is the next one. You can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I'm from Scotland. I don't know if you can hear by my accent. So I'm your international audience you're talking about. So for me, I think you sort of talked slightly about coaching qualifications. So I come from an elite sports background. I'm now a politician in Scotland, lead a council, and I'm looking at developing esports. And there is a lot of resistance for people who, exactly what you're saying, I've given that same presentation about that stereotype, and I've used that exact same Cartman picture, and then I've used someone else. But one thing I feel is, I'm not saying but probably is lacking, is that pathway into excellence So we have a lot of sports clubs, so they know if they start the grassroots 4 years old, 5 years old at football, they can develop through the years and potentially end up at the other end at a football club. Same with rugby, same with athletics. But esports, it feels, I think you said it was like a babysitting service sometimes. They come along, they sit there, but they're not seeing that pathway. And I think for a lot of parents, they need to see the pathway, but they also need to see that physical activity is a major part of that pathway to develop the skills. So I wonder if there's work that needs to be done in creating these courses, creating this pathway, so people can see the excellence. And esports is still relatively young in a lot of ways, where the players accidentally find out, oh, I'm good at this. Okay, how do I do it? I play online, I play the competitions. And how do you think, and this is another question, so the Fortnite FNCS Championships are going to be in Copenhagen next month. What difference do you think that will make in terms of a legacy opportunity for Denmark to actually propel that? Or this is the landscape your young people can play in. How do we develop that pathway? Is that going to be a big opportunity?
Yes, if we start with the first part of esports lacking a pathway, it's kind of what I touched on earlier as well, because the coaches, they lack this experience, and as you say, it's just a babysitting service in many ways. And I think something that we have to do, it sounds like internationally as well, is educate these coaches and kind of make the coaches realize that esports is more than just gaming. It actually can be a career, and maybe some of these young children who participate actually have a dream of becoming great at the game. So maybe the coaches should take this into account and actually help the players realize this dream. But they don't have the acquired skills to do so, I think. Not yet, at least. Maybe the upcoming generation will have more insight into how to do that.
Can I add to that, Robert?
Yes.
I think I very much agree. The whole, like, if you look at traditional sports, you have, I don't know, a history of 300 years of football, right? It's a culture that has been developing for quite some time, and the coaches that we see in Denmark at least are typically gamers themselves, and they haven't been a part of the traditional sports culture. And I think that's the idea that we want to promote, and that, like, cultural change, it takes a lot of time. We have to be patient on that regard, because the players that we are coaching now in Copenhagen Esports, when they grow up through a organizational environment, I think they are more likely to promote that idea and become coaches themselves. But that's in 5 years, 10 years time. So we have to wait in regards, like, if you can compare them to the coaches we have today that didn't grow up in an organized structural esports training. They just played many hours from home. So there's a big change over time here that I expect to see. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow that development. You also had a question about there was that an event in Copenhagen next month, or are you referring to Blast, or what?
No, yeah, it's going to be next month. The FNCS World Championships will be at the Royal Arena in Copenhagen. So Fortnite. So
Okay.
huge.
I'm not into Fortnite, so I don't know anything about that.
So maybe that.
How is that? What was the question again? Is it connected to physical activity? Are they promoting some sort of?
Yeah. It was connected to that performance outcome. So people can then see who are not really obviously a favour with esports can actually see this is the elite level. This is what your child, maybe they're going along to club, but this is maybe what they want to be. How does that fit in, and can that change mindsets? As esports is not just sitting at a computer, it's actually this whole worldwide phenomenon that the young people who are excellent can be earning major money if they excel. And I just wonder if that would help in Denmark and help with your.
I think in Denmark we are so lucky to have Astralis and other big Counter-Strike teams who are doing very well in the world scene as well. And I know that Astralis is definitely a talking point at almost every esports training, also on grassroots level. And they are wearing Astralis shirts as well. So they definitely know about the esports and how to be a pro at it, and that it's a possibility to become a pro. But I don't think these young kids necessarily have the dreams yet to become Astralis players. It's more the older players.
Like in regards of physical activity, we actually asked some of the players what they thought about Astralis, and we found that like the coaches almost called it the Astralis effect. That now the coaches who are into physical activity, they can actually use the Astralis effect to promote physical activity to the kids. But when we talk to the kids about the Astralis effect, they weren't necessarily. I'm not sure if that transitions, because you're at a different level. You're not an elite Counter-Strike gamer. Maybe you want to become that at some point, but right now, when you're 11 years old, I think you are more into playing Fortnite live than actually doing blame F stuff down at the at the fitness club where you have to push dumbbells and things like that. And that's, I'm not sure if we pointed to that a lot on the presentation here, but we found a big difference in the motivation from, or how you implemented physical activity in regards to the younger group around 11 years old and to the older group around 15 years old. And they're of course motivated very differently, where you at the young group, you want to see or use more play, and on the older levels, you use performance, competitive elements, and a lot of these, I think Robert called them deathmatch activities, where you actually play the game, then you do push-ups, and then you get back onto the server. That works better for the older group. So the whole idea that the professional level actually implements or promotes the idea of physical activity, it works, but only to some extent, I'd say.
Thank you. Asbjørn and Robert, are you fine with prolonging the session for like 10 minutes? Okay,
Sure.
because
Yeah,
I have
Sure.
additional questions, and Mike also got one. There is of course research on that, and I think you also touched on that players, even professional players, perceive that physical activity is improving their performance in game and also helping them to create social networks. And I think the role model effect that Astralis is providing for the youth is really beneficial. And there was one question or two questions exactly from the audience, that there is the perception of a change over time. So the older players get, the less they are interested in physical activity. Have you made similar perceptions, or can you say something about how to transition what you do with youth adults or youth players in contrast to older adults from, let's say, over 16 years of age or 18 years of age?
So in the description of the project, there were actually sort of a target group definition, and I think that was from 11 to 15 years old. But when you visit esports clubs, you often, like, I think we went to a club that played FIFA, and I think they had a training session where they had players from 12 to 20 years old, and we got to interview all of them. That was quite interesting, and that's, I think, one of the beautiful things in esports, that you can actually meet or have things in common, even though you have such a gap in age. But yeah, do you want to add something to this, Robert, in regards to the older generation? I think I pointed towards it earlier.
Yeah, we talked a bit about it, about the in-game abilities. They're more focused on performance and becoming better. And I think when you implement these physical activities, the way to motivate this age group is not to mention that paper balls of sniper bullets. It's more about mentioning the communication part of the game, that you can really learn about communication and cooperation, that you can take from the activity into the game. And I think that's the way to motivate the older age group, whereas the younger is more about the playful elements.
Yeah. Asbjørn, do you want to add something?
I was just thinking, I have nothing, no scientific background here on this topic, but I know from like youth culture and science there, we can see in Denmark that like when you become 14 years old, or the 14-year-old to the 18-year-olds are the ones that are most difficult engaging in sports activities. So and I think that's because there's a lot of things going on in that age. Like there's a lot of things going on in your body. Girls are all of a sudden interesting, which should actually be an idea or an argument to be more physical active, right? But I think also you have, gaming becomes more interesting, or maybe school. Like there's a lot of things going on that people tend to. I think we know that from our own lives that when you have work to do, maybe it becomes harder to actually take your time to do physical activity.
Yeah.
So it might be related to that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I want to add is that it can also always be beneficial to address why you do certain things, even to 11 to 15-year-olds, to explain, okay, we do this game because of course it's fun, but we can also improve our communication, and then they understand, and it's not just a game that they should try. They don't know about it. Maybe they think, oh, I won't enjoy that at all, but yeah, this is something that could be kept in mind. Okay, so Mike has been waiting for a long time to ask the question. So Mike, it's your turn now.
Amazing. Great work, guys. I'm always impressed every time I come across your work. You guys don't get enough accolades for the work that you're doing. You may not even realize, I don't think, the significance of what you're doing. You guys really are the world leaders in terms of this stuff, and Denmark really is leading the pack in terms of grassroots esports. I've had a fair bit to do with Australian grassroots esports before I moved to Sweden, and one of the things that we kind of came across time and time again was the importance of these grassroots clubs in terms of supporting what ultimately becomes both professional and mid-level sports, and events that are based in various locations are very, very dependent upon the strength of these kind of clubs. So it's really, really great to see what you guys are doing. I have so many questions, but to try to boil it down, I suppose there are two things. One is, obviously, like you said, the objective here is more about functional physical activity. You guys want to work out how to build physical activity into your program in order to be able to do three things. You're building social connections. You're helping them to keep blood moving through their brain to increase their cognitive capacity. I can't remember what the third thing I was going to say was, but these things are massively applicable not only within an esports context, but within other domains as well, right? So in Australia, we had a number of years ago, they implemented a new system for testing students. They had a national test they would run every year to benchmark all of the students. And what schools were doing is they were letting their kids run wild for about half an hour before these tests in order to boost test scores. And they worked that out, and then they stopped doing it as soon as the tests stopped working. It was crazy. But I suppose what I'm trying to eventually get to here is that what you guys are essentially doing is teaching these kids how to utilize physical activity in such a way that it benefits their cognitive development and their cognitive functioning in a way which could very easily be used to regulate things like their academic performance and other forms of performance in other domains, which I think from a societal perspective is massively important. Have you guys considered much about including some of that kind of messaging in terms of what you guys are doing with your clubs and with your students, identifying the fact that these strategies, these kind of self-regulatory strategies, can be used in other domains, not just within esports? I wonder both from your students' perspective, but also in terms of the communication with the parents, like that could be quite powerful. And then the other question I had was, so I'm a researcher up in northern Sweden, a uni up here, and the work that you guys are doing is both from a coaching perspective and what you guys are doing with your coaches, but also in terms of just the raw work you're doing in terms of physical activity and performance and cognition and all that kind of stuff is really, really interesting to us. And as you mentioned, Sweden has just recently recognized esports as a sport. So there's going to be a massive amount of need to better understand these concepts. And I'm really interested in seeing if potentially you guys would be interested in doing some collaboration and building some projects together. I reckon there's some EU funding to be had here that could both support the work you're doing, but also to be able to bolster and create a lot more opportunities in terms of research. That's the longest question I think I've ever asked.
I think I would like to emphasize on the whole the first question pointing towards how you can, like, the structural political the community benefits from this also, if I got your question right. We here at Center for Youth Studies, it's one of our main focuses when we do research or active research. We want to try to translate the things you get from the sport, all the activities you do when you're not in school. How can you actually make sure that you transfer the learnings from that activity into maybe a school arena, or maybe in getting a job as a, I don't know, whatever you do as an adolescent. So that's a very complicated task to do, especially if you're 13 years old. How do you actually reflect enough on your activity that you actually get to figure out, oh, so I'm an in-game leader, which actually gives me the capabilities of promoting something else in a different arena, sort of being the team leader in school or things like that. And this, of course, also relates to physical activity, where you can use that in different arenas, of course. And I'd say we actually were quite inspired by traditional playing activities that you see in schools in Denmark today, where you use play as a way to sort of do these brain breaks. It's almost the same complex or sort of paradigm that we work with here. But one thing is knowing theoretically that this is a thing that works. Another thing is that how do we promote that to a coach that doesn't necessarily agree with those values or the ideas of physical activity? And it's, of course, it's easier for me to promote or tell about those values than it is for a volunteer coach that doesn't necessarily know anything about it, or doesn't want to. So I think it's hard to transition from the theory to the practice side of things. But we tried to promote it. We made a coach manual, and we tried to write it into the introduction. And the programs also say, so now we are walking around the building. It's a break. Tell me more about what physical activities means to you, or something like that. So we tried to sort of modulate it into the programs, but how big of an impact it actually made, I'm not that sure about that.
Yeah, I think it takes time. I think it's a cultural change we're kind of making, and we're kind of just disguising it a bit. So we're introducing these young esports players to a way of esports with physical activity, so they kind of grow up getting used to, okay, this is a normal part of esports, and maybe when they get older and become coaches themselves, maybe it's also a part of their training. So it's kind of a cultural change we're trying to do, and I think just the last 2 to 3 years that I've been working with activity in esports, it's already improving a lot, and I see more and more esports associations using physical activity as a fun break time in esports. So it's happening for sure at some point. Just take time.
Thank you very much for your insights, and Mike for asking this lovely question, or lovely questions. I think it's easy to connect the three of you. I indeed have one last question to end the session, because I think it's very important to all of us. And organizations have to think about how to make their programs, and also especially physical activity, incorporated into the esport programs accessible to everyone and inclusive. Have you made any experiences with that regard for your project? So how to make your program and physical activity accessible and inclusive?
Inclusive in what regard?
Like people, for example, with disabilities or impairments?
It was actually framed quite vaguely in the project program that we had to research or look into the perspectives or the potentials of recruiting or promoting esports activities and physical health or physical activities to, I think they called it target groups that are not usually a part of esports or traditional sports activities. So that could be girls. It could also be people with mental challenges in one way or another. But it could also just be people that has no experience with sports club activities. So it was quite difficult for us to look into this. At the same time, we had to work on this physical activity thing also because there might be we touched on this shortly in the report, but there are challenges in making these physical activities in a way that they do not scare, as Robert also pointed out earlier, that they don't scare people who are not very interested in physical activities. Let's say this might be a stereotype, right? But if you're an artist, I don't think that you necessarily are good with your physical body, or you don't have any interest in that necessarily. We didn't see any of these cases during the project, but I'm sure that could be a challenge. So like to answer your question in short, no, we didn't make sure how we could implement or integrate these target groups.
Okay, thank you.
But I think the idea is that you sorry, I'm just gonna continue rambling here, but I think the whole idea is that we don't try to make physical activities that are so scary that they are not universal in some regard.
Yeah, no CrossFit workouts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you don't like football, we shouldn't do any football exercises.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering this question. It was satisfying for me. We gained a lot of insights into the program itself, into the grassroots, into the Danish grassroots esports scene, informing practical implications for players, for coaches, for teams, and also research opportunities for future endeavors. So thank you very much. It was a joy for me, and I think for the audience too, to listen to you. And thanks once again to the members in the audience for joining. Are there any things you would like to address, Asbjørn and Robert, before we close this session?
Just thank you very much for having us. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the project. I think me and Robert would like to see if we can translate the report so it becomes available to more people that are into this topic.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone who wants to connect with Robert and Asbjørn is welcome to do so. The links to their social media handles are in the chat or linked below the video recording on YouTube. So thank you very much once again, and see you in the next Esports Research Colloquium on October, I think 11, 4 p.m. CET, with a session with Jenny on the Routledge Handbook of Esports, which is also a pretty important and interesting topic, such as today's topic was. So goodbye.
Bye-bye.